Valerian Prime, jewel of the astral kingdoms, seat of the first throne, hung in the star-washed void like a shard of molten gold suspended in the black velvet of the cosmos. Its surface shimmered with cities woven from silver and light, floating gardens that drifted between crystal spires and fleets of luminous ships sailing the upper atmosphere like celestial fish. Far above it all, in the tallest tower of the imperial palace, Princess Emily stood before a half-moon window of black obsidian. She gazed down upon the waking capital below, its markets opening like jeweled blossoms, its hover caravan lanes beginning to hum, yet none of it could pierce the stillness in her chest. The imperial palace was alive in its own way. The corridors whispered, the marble floors reflected more than just faces. They reflected secrets, plots, and the silent calculations of those who walked them. The air itself felt curated, perfumed, with imported scents from conquered worlds, a subtle reminder of the empire's reach. Emily had grown up inside this cage of brilliance where every column was carved to impress, every gesture calculated to send a message. And yet, for all the majesty, the palace was nothing more than a gilded prison. A soft chime at the door drew her from the window. Mira, her chief attendant, stepped inside with her usual elegance. A tall, narrow woman draped in silver-threaded robes, her face expressionless. "Your Highness, the Emperor commands your presence at the morning council." Emily turned, surprise flickering beneath her composed exterior. She was rarely summoned to the morning council. Policy decisions, matters of governance, those were kept behind closed doors where she was nothing more than an ornament to be displayed later at banquets. Still, she said nothing. In the palace, every word was a blade. You only drew it when necessary. Mira's attendants dressed her quickly in a gown of midnight blue laced with threads of stardust. It fell in flowing layers that shifted color as she moved, from deep sapphire to black. She studied her reflection in the mirror. Skin as pale as porcelain, hair a flawless cascade of white silver, eyes the cold violet of a dying star. The face of a queen, people often said, but a queen without a throne. The council chamber was as imposing as the empire it governed. Golden panels climbed the walls like captured sunlight, and above, a domed ceiling projected a slow-turning map of the galaxy, each star a pinprick of living light. The long crescent table was already occupied by the high ministers, each in robes stitched with their planetary emblems, each pretending not to watch her too closely. At the center, on the throne wrought from meteoric iron and inlaid with obsidian, sat Emperor Valerius, her father. His expression was the same as always, carved in stone, unreadable. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber like the toll of a distant bell, "you will undertake a diplomatic mission to the eastern colonies. Tensions rise there. It is time you prove yourself beyond the walls of this palace." The words might have sounded like an honor to an outsider, but Emily knew better. In the palace, nothing was without calculation. Assignments like these could be gifts or weapons, sometimes both. As the ministers debated trade tariffs and military patrols, she sat silently, absorbing the glances cast her way. Some were dismissive, some speculative, and some carried the gleam of quiet malice. She recognized the look. It was the same one hunters gave to prey when they already knew how the hunt would end. When the meeting adjourned, she moved through the outer hall, her footsteps echoing in the long corridor. That was when she heard it, hushed voices drifting from an archway just ahead. Sending her there is the cleanest way. No scandal, no blood in the palace. And if she returns, she won't. The words slid under her skin like a blade of ice. She continued walking, her face the perfect mask of indifference, though her heart was pounding. If this was a trap, it meant two things. Someone wanted her gone, and her father was willing to let them try. And perhaps worst of all, if she stayed, the palace itself might prove more dangerous than any distant colony. She stopped at the edge of the corridor, resting her hand lightly against the cold, flawless wall. It was said that the palace had 1,000 eyes and 1,000 ears. In that moment, Emily decided that if it was going to watch her, she would learn to watch back. The game had begun, and she intended not just to survive it, but to win. If you'd like, I can now write Chapter 2, Poisoned Whispers, at the same length and depth, where Emily starts probing the real power web inside the palace before she departs. That's where the intrigue will truly tighten its grip. The days that followed Emily's summons to the morning council moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, as though the palace itself was holding its breath. Preparations for her journey to the eastern colonies filled her schedule: ceremonial fittings, diplomatic briefings, tedious lists of customs and planetary etiquette. But beneath the polished surface, a different current ran, one she could feel in the stares that lingered too long, the sudden silences when she entered a room. Valerian's palace was built not just of stone and starlight, but of whispers. They slithered through the colonnades, curling into the ears of servants and ministers alike, changing shape as they passed from mouth to mouth. Emily knew the first rule of survival here: you do not chase whispers, you let them come to you. So she moved through her days with the calm grace expected of a princess, listening. The first tendril of truth came from the east garden. It was early evening, the sky over Valerian painted in strokes of gold and deep crimson, when Emily crossed the marble bridge above the koi pool. Mira trailed behind her, silent, as the scent of glass orchids drifted from the hothouses. Two courtesy ladies stood at the fountain, their voices soft, but not soft enough. The colony governors will tear her apart. Perhaps that's the point. She is her mother's daughter, after all. Hush, before the walls hear you. Emily kept walking, her expression unchanged, but her thoughts had already sharpened like drawn steel. Her mother's daughter. It had been years since anyone dared speak of Empress Selene openly. The late Empress's fall from favor was a story, coated in layers of half-truths, accusations of conspiracy, forbidden alliances, betrayal at the highest level. Selene had died in what the records called an accident. Emily had never believed it. If someone was tying her fate to her mother's, then whatever trap awaited her in the colonies might be an echo of the past. The second thread came from far more dangerous company. That night, as the palace quieted, Emily found herself in the West Hall, where the torches burned with blue fire, and the windows opened to a view of the Capitol sprawl. A shadow detached itself from one of the pillars and became a man, lean, tall, wearing the matte black uniform of the Emperor's private intelligence corps. "Your Highness," he murmured, bowing just enough to acknowledge her rank, but not enough to flatter. "A word of advice: trust no one on this mission. Not the governors, not the escorts your father assigns, and certainly not the ship's captain." Emily tilted her head, her tone smooth and measured. And why would a loyal agent offer such counsel? The man smiled faintly, though it never reached his eyes. "Because, Princess, I was told to ensure you arrive at the colonies alive. No one said anything about ensuring you return." Before she could speak, he had already melted back into the shadows, leaving her with a faint scent of ozone and the certainty that her voyage was no mere diplomatic errand. It was a stage, and she was both the lead actress and the intended casualty. That night she sat at her dressing table, removing the star-thread pins from her hair, each motion slow and deliberate. Her reflection looked back at her, serene as carved marble. Mira entered quietly, carrying a sealed datapad. "This arrived through unofficial channels," she said, setting it down. Emily opened it. The screen flared to life, displaying only a single line of text. "Your mother knew the truth. She died for it. Will you? No sender. No traceable encryption. Key." She set the datapad aside without comment, but inside her pulse had quickened. Whatever lay ahead in the eastern colonies wasn't just a threat to her life. It was a thread tied to her mother's death, to secrets buried deep within the Empire's most guarded vaults. Emily closed the window shutters, shutting out the glittering skyline of Valerian Prime. She had 3 days before departure, 3 days to decide how to play a game she hadn't chosen, but which she intended to master. And if someone in the palace wanted her gone, she would make certain they learned the danger of underestimating an empress's daughter. The great banquet hall of Valerian was a cathedral of excess. 1,000 candles floated in the air, suspended by invisible grave fields, their flames dancing in an unseen breeze. The vaulted ceiling shimmered with the projection of the eastern colony's constellations, a reminder to all assembled where the Empire's next chapter would unfold. Columns of black glass, veined with silver, reflected the glitter of gemstones and silks below. The air was thick with perfume and the low hum of conversation, punctuated by the soft chime of crystal goblets. Musicians in silver masks played the Lament of the First Moon, a song steeped in tradition, though its melancholic tone felt more like a farewell than a celebration. At the center of it all sat Emily, in the seat of honor to her father's right. Her gown was woven from night silk, a fabric that caught the light in ripples, as though liquid shadows clung to her every movement. Her pale skin seemed to glow against the dark fabric, and her hair, pinned in an intricate crown braid, caught the glint of starlight from the ceiling's projection. Every inch of her presentation screamed untouchable royalty, but Emily knew better. In Valerian's court, beauty was just another blade. The emperor, regal in black and gold armor that gleamed as if polished by the sun itself, raised his goblet. "To my daughter," he declared, his voice resonating through the hall. "May she carry the will of Valerian to the colonies and return with their loyalty renewed." The assembled nobles echoed the toast. The words were polite, but their eyes were hunting. Some looked at her with poorly concealed pity, others with the sharp interest of vultures circling above a battlefield. From the far end of the table, Governor Althera of the Eastern Reach smiled at her, a slow, knowing smile. Emily returned it with equal calm, though she'd already marked him as dangerous. As the first course was served, crimson moon fruit sliced in perfect crescents, the real feast began, the quiet exchange of information. Lady Sorrel, her cousin on her mother's side, leaned in slightly. "They say the captain assigned to your voyage has never lost a passenger, except one," she murmured, her lips barely moving. "How unfortunate for that one," Emily replied, sipping her wine without breaking eye contact with the governor. Then came Lord Darwin, a man whose reputation for gossip was only surpassed by his skill at surviving court purges. "I hear the governors have prepared a welcoming committee. Their hospitality is legendary." He paused just long enough for the word to curdle. Emily let her gaze drift lazily across the table, noting who avoided her eyes when she looked their way. Midway through the feast, the emperor's steward announced a gift from the governors, an ornate obsidian box carried by 2 attendants. When the lid was lifted, the contents drew an audible murmur from the crowd. A ceremonial dagger, its hilt carved from bone-white crystal, its blade black as the void. "A symbol of your authority," Governor Althera said, "and of the seriousness of your mission." Emily accepted it with both hands, bowing slightly. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice smooth. But when her fingers brushed the blade, she felt the faintest sting, as if it had been poisoned. A test, a warning, or both. The rest of the night was a parade of veiled barbs disguised as compliments, alliances offered with too bright smiles, and toasts that tasted like eulogies. By the time the feast ended, Emily's head was clear despite the wine, a trick she had learned long ago. Every word, every glance, Every shift in the hall's temperature was stored away in her mind, like pieces of a puzzle. Her father kissed her brow in farewell before withdrawing to his private chambers, leaving Emily to make her way through the departing crowd. It was then, near the hall's great doors, that she felt a slip of paper pressed into her palm by an anonymous hand. She did not look at the messenger. To do so would have been to admit knowledge. Only when she reached her private quarters did she unfold it. 3 words written in a jagged, hurried script: "The dagger knows. If you want, I can make Chapter 4. The Ship of Shadows next, where Emily boards the vessel and the intrigue shifts into a claustrophobic moving stage filled with spies, double agents, and silent threats. That's where the game gets tighter. The Virelia was nothing like the ceremonial beauty of the Imperial fleet. From the outside it was a long, angular vessel of obsidian hull plates, almost predatory in its design, with no gleam of polished metal or ornament to soften its silhouette. It was a warship disguised as a transport, and everyone who saw it knew it. Emily stood at the docking bridge, the cool air of the port whipping against her cheeks as she looked at her new prison for the months ahead. Around her, attendants busied themselves with last-minute cargo transfers, security scans, and formal paperwork. But she knew every movement was being watched, not for efficiency, but for advantage. The Virelia had a reputation whispered in the shadowed corners of court. It never failed its mission, and yet those who boarded it often returned quieter, harder, or not at all. The captain greeted her at the threshold. Captain Raoul Verin was tall and whip-thin, his skin the shade of old iron, his uniform stripped of all but the most necessary insignia. His eyes were the color of burnished glass, reflective, unreadable. "Your Highness," he said with a bow that was neither deferential nor disrespectful, merely precise. "Your quarters are ready. My crew has been briefed on your status. We depart the moment the Emperor's signal reaches us." Emily held his gaze a beat too long, testing him. "And until then? Until then, we wait." Waiting is often the most dangerous part of any voyage. Inside, the Virelia felt less like a ship and more like a labyrinth carved from black stone. The corridors were narrow, the lighting minimal, casting long shadows that moved when no one did. The hum of the engines was a constant presence, not loud enough to be disruptive, but just enough to keep the nerves alert. Her private quarters were austere but spacious by ship standards. No unnecessary decoration, no flowers, no silks. Just a bed, a desk bolted to the wall, and a narrow viewport looking out into the abyss. The dagger from Governor Althera lay, in its case, on the desk. Emily touched the hilt lightly, recalling the note she'd received. The dagger knows. By the second hour aboard, she began her tour. Officially, she was acquainting herself with the ship's facilities. In truth, she was mapping escape routes, bottlenecks, and the locations of every crew member who looked at her just a moment too long. She noticed patterns immediately. 3 engineers always moved in pairs. A communications officer kept glancing toward her whenever she entered the command deck. A young medic flinched whenever their eyes met, as though hiding a dangerous secret. And then there was the sealed door on Deck 5. No markings, no guards, just locked. She filed it away in her mind. Locked doors were never meaningless. On the 3rd day, a disturbance. She was in the mess hall when the ship shuddered. A brief but unmistakable tremor. Conversations halted. Even the hum of the engines seemed to pause for a breath. Captain Verin appeared moments later, his voice calm, but his jaw set. "Navigation reports a microfracture in the starboard hull plating," he announced. "Nothing critical. Repairs underway. Return to your duties." The crew dispersed, but Emily remained seated, sipping her drink slowly. A microfracture was plausible, but plausible and true were rarely the same in the circle she moved in. That night her suspicions deepened. she woke to the faint sound of voices outside her door. They were low, urgent, just beyond clarity. She rose silently, padding barefoot to the metal panel, pressing her ear against it. "Not supposed to be in this sector," one voice murmured. "Orders changed. She's not to know." The rest dissolved into the creak of footsteps retreating. Emily didn't follow, not yet. Patience, in her world, was sharper than any blade. The Virelia was moving faster than she had been told. She could feel it in the subtle change of vibration through the deck, in the shift of the stars beyond. Her viewport. And in her gut, Emily knew they were no longer taking her where the Emperor had said. The first betrayal didn't come with a dagger in the dark. It came with breakfast. Emily entered the mess hall at her usual time, noting the same careful choreography of crew members avoiding her gaze. The air smelled faintly of heated rations and recycled air filters, the kind of scent you never got used to in deep space. A tray awaited her at her seat. She hadn't ordered it. No one did things for her here without reason. Steam curled from a cup of dark crimson, a synthetic nutrient blend engineered for her species' unique physiology. It looked perfect. Too perfect. She didn't touch it. Instead, she glanced casually at the young crewman assigned to serve. That morning, a boy no older than 20, skin pale from too many months off planet. He kept his head down as he worked, but his hands, they trembled. Emily's instincts sharpened. She had seen this before. In the palace, during her father's reign, when fear clung to a person like a scent they couldn't wash away. She slid the cup aside and spoke softly. "You taste it." His head snapped up. "Your Highness, I don't have the authority? Then take mine." Her voice carried no heat, only the calm certainty that comes from knowing she would be obeyed. He hesitated too long. That was all the answer she needed. By the time Captain Varon arrived, Emily had already summoned the medic. A thin beam from a diagnostic wand revealed it, a molecular compound disguised as nutrient stabilizer, harmless to most humanoids, but catastrophic to her own biochemistry. Varon's expression didn't change, but his eyes were knives. Some went on. "This ship just made a very dangerous mistake." Emily leaned back in her chair, studying him. "Mistake?" "No, Captain. Mistakes are accidents. This was deliberate." The investigation was swift, brutal, and deeply unsatisfying. The boy who had brought the cup swore he was only following orders from the food prep officer. The officer swore he had no knowledge of the compound, suggesting it must have been tampered with en route. But the supply logs showed no breach, no unauthorized access. It was a perfect circle of denial, the kind used in the palace to make sure no truth ever surfaced without someone powerful wanting it to. Emily recognized the hand of an experienced manipulator. Someone aboard was testing her, not to kill her outright, but to see how she would respond. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she wandered the Virelia's lower decks, barefoot and silent, blending into the hum of the ship. She passed crew quarters, locked storage bays, and eventually found herself outside that same sealed door on Deck 5. Something was different. The faintest trace of warm air seeped from its edges, carrying a metallic tang that her senses didn't mistake for machinery. Blood. Old and faint, but unmistakable. She was still standing there when a shadow fell across her. The young medic, the one who had flinched whenever she looked at him, stood in the corridor, eyes wide. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was low, deliberate. "Neither should you." He didn't answer, only glanced nervously at the door, then back toward the stairwell. Finally, he whispered, "If you want to survive this voyage, stop asking questions about Deck 5. Emily stepped closer, her pale hair catching the dim light like spun ice. "You think I'm afraid of a locked door?" "I think," he said, backing away, "you're not afraid enough." When she returned to her quarters, the untouched cup of crimson nutrient still sat on her desk. She didn't drink it. She didn't throw it away. She kept it, a reminder that the first betrayal was never the last. If you want, I can make Chapter 6, Shadows in the Airlock. Next, where Emily discovers that the poisoning was only a distraction from something far more dangerous happening on the Verelia. That's when suspicion turns into open sabotage. Not the normal deep space kind of quiet. The low thrum of engines and the gentle hiss of oxygen circulation still filled the air. No, this was a silence of people. Fewer footsteps in the corridors. No idle conversation over comms. Even the mess hall had emptied early, as though an unspoken curfew had settled over the crew. Emily had lived in palaces her whole life. She knew what it meant when a space that should have been alive with activity suddenly stilled. It meant something was about to happen. It began with a faint metallic echo through her private cabin. The ship's environmental system hummed. Normally, but beneath it, she caught something different, the distinctive hiss and clank of an airlock cycle. She shouldn't have been able to hear that from her quarters. She rose immediately, wrapping her long frost-pale hair into a quick braid and slipping into her dark, high-collared coat. In the corridor, the light panels flickered. Not enough to suggest a full power failure, but just enough to unsettle anyone paying attention. Emily paid attention to everything. The airlock in question was one of the secondary docking bays, rarely used, sealed except for supply runs. She moved silently, her bare feet barely making a sound on the cold metal floor. The closer she got, the more she felt the wrongness of the air. A trace of cold spite, the kind that came from the void itself, lingered in the corridor like a ghost. The bay door was closed, its indicator panel showing standby. No sign of who had triggered the cycle. Emily approached the console, hands moving to override. The screen flared red. Access denied. Authority lockout. Whoever had cycled the airlock had done so under an encrypted command, the kind only senior officers, or someone pretending to be one, could initiate. She could have walked away. She could have gone to the captain, filed a formal inquiry. That would have been the reasonable choice. But reason had no place in a palace or on a ship riddled with silent betrayals. She waited. Minutes stretched. Then the bay's interior hatch hissed open, and a figure emerged. They moved quickly, keeping their face down, their form wrapped in a nondescript maintenance cloak. In their hands was a sealed container, small enough to carry, heavy enough to require both hands. Emily caught the faintest sound as they passed, a soft, liquid slosh. Blood. She stepped from the shadows without hesitation. Interesting hour for a delivery. The figure froze, then turned their head just enough for her to glimpse a fragment of their face beneath the hood, not enough to identify them, but enough to see their eyes widen in shock. "Step aside, Your Highness." The voice was low, distorted by a vocal modulator. "You don't want to be part of this." Emily's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, but I do, especially when you make it sound so deliciously illicit." They made a move to push past her. Emily didn't step aside. The confrontation lasted only seconds. The figure shoved the container toward her, not as an attack but as a distraction, and slipped into the corridor's shadows. By the time she caught her balance, they were gone, the only evidence of their presence, the container still resting in her arms. It was heavy, warm. She carried it back to her quarters, locking the door behind her. The seal was military grade, but not beyond her capabilities. With a hiss it cracked open, and the scent hit her like a wave. Blood, not synthetic, not packaged, fresh, and not from her species. She sealed it again, her mind racing. Fresh blood in deep space wasn't just rare. It was dangerous. It meant someone had been hurt, killed, or captured very recently. And whoever was smuggling it through the airlock wasn't just breaking regulations. They were hiding something from the entire crew. Emily realized the poisoning at breakfast hadn't been an attempt to kill her. It had been a distraction, something to pull her attention away from this. And now she had proof of a game being played aboard the Verelia that went far deeper than she'd imagined. The problem was, she had no idea who was winning. Not in the mess hall or the command deck, but in the observation lounge, a circular chamber lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of distant stars and drifting nebula. Here, the ambient lighting was dimmed to soft blues and purples, creating an atmosphere both serene and unnerving. Emily arrived alone, her pale form wrapped in a midnight blue cloak that shimmered faintly under the starlight. She had expected suspicion, but the assembly waiting for her was more complex than any she'd faced before. There were no guards. Instead, the room held a circle of figures, officers, diplomats, even a few shadows too obscure to place immediately. Each wore the subtle insignia of a different faction, some loyal to the emperor, others to distant colonies, and some whose allegiances twisted like smoke in the void. Emily's eyes scanned each face, sharp and calculating. She recognized the smirks of old rivals and the tentative expressions of uneasy allies. At the center of the circle, atop a crystalline pedestal, lay a single object, the ceremonial dagger she had received at the feast, but now stained with fresh, dark blood. A voice broke the silence, low, measured, and unmistakably familiar. "Your Highness," said Captain Varyn, stepping forward from the shadows, "the dagger has been sent back to you with a message." Emily's gaze flicked to him, her ally or her enemy, she could never be sure. "The blood belongs to one of your father's most trusted advisors, a man named Cale Duran." A ripple went through the room. Cale Duran had been missing for weeks, presumed detained for his opposition to the Emperor's new policies. His disappearance was one of the many dark threads weaving through the court's web of lies. Emily's voice was steady. "And who sent this message?" A diplomat from the outer colonies, a tall woman with eyes like molten silver, stepped forward. "We don't know, but it's meant to remind you. Your enemies are close, and their reach extends far beyond the ship." The implication was clear. The Virelia was not just a vessel transporting a princess. It was a battlefield for power, loyalty, and survival. As the meeting dissolved into whispered conversations and furtive glances, Emily felt the weight of the dagger in her hand, both a weapon and a symbol of her fragile position. Outside the lounge, the stars burned cold and indifferent. Inside, the game was only beginning. The Virelia hummed quietly beneath her feet, a silent predator drifting through the void. Yet within its metal veins flowed a far more tangled network than any wiring or data stream, a web of shadows, whispers, and hidden agendas woven tighter than Emily had ever dared imagine. Standing at the threshold of her private chamber, the ceremonial dagger still wrapped carefully in black velvet, Emily allowed herself a moment of cold calculation. The blood-stained token was more than a threat. It was a map, pointing toward her enemies, their methods, and their weaknesses. Her first move was subtle. A whispered conversation in the corridors, a glance shared in the mess hall, a carefully leaked rumor to the engineering crew. Each thread she pulled revealed more about the players aboard the ship, their alliances, and their secrets. The young medic, once so nervous, was now an unwitting pawn in her game. Under the surface of his fear, Emily sensed a simmering resentment, perhaps a desire for revenge or freedom from his own hidden burdens. She summoned him quietly to her quarters under the pretense of medical aid, catching him off guard. "Fear makes people do strange things," Emily said softly, watching his face pale in the dim light. He nodded, unable to meet her gaze. "But loyalty," she continued, "can be bought, and fear can be used." She offered him a chance, information for protection, secrets in exchange for allegiance. The medic hesitated, torn between instinct and survival. When he finally nodded, it was a victory won not by force, but by understanding the shadows within him. From there, Emily moved faster. She intercepted coded messages, tracing their origins. to a hidden comm relay buried deep in the ship's lower decks. When she confronted the operators, a secretive faction loyal neither to the Emperor nor to the colony governors, they offered her a choice: expose them and risk chaos, or use their network to her advantage. She chose the latter. With their eyes and ears now at her command, Emily began weaving a tighter web. She fed false information to rival factions, baited traps for would-be assassins, and planted seeds of distrust among her enemies. Every move was a delicate balance. One misstep could unravel her plans and leave her exposed. But with every thread pulled, she felt more in control. At night, alone in her quarters, she looked out at the stars, cold and distant. The galaxy was vast and indifferent, but aboard the Veralia, a storm of human ambition and alien politics raged, and Emily was its eye. Her enemies circled, but so did her allies, some hidden, some obvious, and all dangerous. She was no longer just a passenger on this ship. She was the Spider. The Veralia's grand observation lounge was transformed. Where once its windows offered only cold starlight and drifting nebulae, now they framed a spectacle of opulence and shadow. A grand masked ball, a tradition borrowed from ancient court. Rituals, but made sharper and more dangerous in the vacuum of space. Crystals hanging from the ceiling caught the low violet light, scattering prismatic glimmers across silks and polished armor. The scent of exotic perfumes mingled with the faint metallic tang of the ship's hull. Emily arrived as the clock struck. Midnight, her gown a deep midnight blue, embroidered with silver threads that traced the constellations. Her mask, delicate yet unyielding, covered the upper half of her face, revealing only the sharp glint of her pale eyes and the faint curve of her lips. The guests came from every faction aboard the Veralia, diplomats cloaked in the shimmering robes of the outer colonies, imperial officers adorned with medals and secrets, mercenaries whose gazes pierced like blades, and shadowy figures whose true intentions were veiled beneath layers of protocol and false smiles. Emily moved through the crowd like a shadow herself, listening, watching, calculating. Each whispered conversation was a thread in the web she was weaving. Her first encounter was with the outer colony's diplomat, the silver-eyed woman, who had delivered the bloodied dagger message. "My princess," the woman purred, "you wear your danger well." Emily smiled thinly. "Danger is the only thing that wears me well." They exchanged veiled warnings, threats wrapped in silken words, neither willing to reveal their full hand. But Emily noted every hesitation, every glance away. Next was Captain Varon, who approached with a glass of dark wine. "A night for masks and mirrors," he murmured, eyes reflecting the chandelier's sparkle. Emily's response was a tilt of her head. "Which mask are you wearing, Captain? The loyal servant or the hidden predator?" He smiled, but it didn't reach. His eyes, perhaps both. The tension between them was electric. Allies and adversaries blurred in the dance of power aboard the ship. But the true test came when Tony Draven arrived, the prince of a rival system, and the one forbidden to her heart. Masked in black velvet, he was a vision of danger and allure. His eyes found hers immediately, sparking a silent storm beneath the glittering facade. Their dance was a duel, steps measured, words unspoken but loaded with meaning. Each movement across the polished floor was a negotiation, a battle for dominance and desire. Midway through the ball, the lights flickered, a subtle but unmistakable signal that something was wrong. Emily's heart quickened. She'd been here before, moments of beauty shattered by hidden violence. Her instincts screamed as a scream echoed from the lower decks, a sound cut short but charged with terror. The guests froze. Masks slipped. The fragile veneer of civility cracked. Emily's hand went to the dagger at her side. The game was no longer a dance. It was war. If you want, I can continue with Chapter 10, The Bloodline Conspiracy, where Emily confronts the deeper secrets of her family's past and the deadly legacy that threatens not only her, but the fate of entire star systems. The echo of the scream still reverberated through the corridors of the Virilia as Emily stormed down the gleaming halls. The grand masked ball, moments ago a dazzling spectacle of power and elegance, had shattered into chaos. Yet chaos was nothing. New to her, it was the language of her bloodline, a legacy etched in whispered betrayals and shadowed thrones. Her footsteps rang sharp against the polished floor as she entered the secure chamber where the ship's data core pulsed with silent energy. There, waiting in the dim glow of holographic displays, stood Captain Varen, his face unreadable, but his eyes burning with urgency. "We intercepted unauthorized data transfers," Varen began, motioning to a floating screen that flickered with fragmented images, star maps, encrypted files, and intercepted communications. "Someone is digging deep into your family history, Princess. More than just political rivals. This is personal." Emily's gaze hardened. "Who?" Varen hesitated, then revealed a name. "The Council of Elders from the Jarian system. They're ancient, ruthless, and they believe your bloodline holds the key to a weapon capable of reshaping galaxies." Emily's breath caught. The Jarian Council was legendary, a shadow government operating beyond the reach of most star systems, feared for their cold, unyielding grip on power. To be their target meant one thing. Her family's past was not only alive, but weaponized. Her mind raced back to her father's whispered warnings, to the old tapes she had hidden away in her private archives, records of forbidden experiments, blood rites, and a prophecy that spoke of a child of starlight destined to either save or destroy civilizations. Varen's voice pulled her back. "They want your DNA, your genetic code. They believe it contains the activation sequence for the weapon. If they get it," Emily finished for him, voice icy, "the galaxy dies." Determined to uncover the truth, Emily accessed her family's secret vault deep within the ship. The door slid open to reveal relics of a bygone era, crystalline data spheres, faded portraits, and an ancient, intricately carved box, the blood cipher. The box was rumored to contain encrypted keys to the weapon's secrets, protected by codes only her bloodline could unlock. As Emily reached out, a sharp alert sounded. The ship's security AI had detected unauthorized access. Someone else was on her trail, closing in. She slipped the blood cipher into her cloak and vanished into the labyrinthine corridors, her every step shadowed by unseen enemies. The weight of her ancestors pressed down on her, but so did a fierce resolve. This was more than survival. It was destiny. Outside, stars burned cold and distant, indifferent to the mortal struggles unfolding in their midst. But Emily knew better. The fate of worlds hinged on secrets buried deep in her blood and on the choices she would make next. The game was no longer about power, it was about legacy. The Virilia was never meant to be a prison, but tonight the polished corridors felt cold and claustrophobic, a gilded cage tightening around Emily's very throat. She had barely caught her breath after the revelations of the bloodline conspiracy when the first strike hit. It came not with blaring alarms or cannon fire, but with the silence of betrayal. Doors sealed by trusted hands, communication severed, allies vanished into the shadows. Emily's private quarters, her sanctuary, was breached while she was away. The blood cipher, the key to her family's legacy, was gone. The news hit her like a physical blow. She stood alone in the dim light of the command deck, the stars. Beyond the viewport, eerily distant, as Captain Varen delivered the grim report. "Someone on this ship has betrayed you, Princess. Someone close. They've rallied a faction, moving to seize control before we even reach the next system." Emily's eyes, sharp and pale as ice, narrowed. "A coup? And it's silent because it's surgical. No open war yet. Varen nodded. They're waiting for the right moment, but I fear it's already too late. She moved swiftly, gathering the few loyalists who had not yet fallen into shadow. Among them was the young medic, whose allegiance she had won with whispered promises and veiled threats. "Trust no one outside this circle," Emily commanded. "We hunt ghosts tonight." The ship's corridors became a maze of tension. Every flickering light, every shuttered viewport, every shadow held potential danger. Emily and her allies moved like predators, silent, precise. An ambush in the lower decks revealed the ruthless efficiency of their enemies. Armed figures in black armor struck without warning, forcing Emily to rely on both cunning and ferocity. She fought not only for the blood cipher, but for the survival of her reign, a reign that might crumble with a single misstep. In the Sioux, chaos. Emily confronted a familiar face, her closest advisor, the one who had whispered counsel through years of intrigue. His eyes, once full of loyalty, now burned with cold ambition. "You were always too soft, Emily," he hissed. "The throne demands strength, and I will give it, with or without you." A deadly dance unfolded between them, words sharper than blades, a struggle of wills beneath the flickering lights of the ship's heart. Emily's victory came not with mercy, but with ice-cold resolve. But as she stood over the broken remnants of trust, a chilling truth settled in her bones. The silent coup was only the beginning. The shadows on the Virelia were deeper than she had dared imagine, and the darkest were yet to come. Outside, the stars remained indifferent. Inside, a war for the soul of a princess raged on. The echo of betrayal still rang in Emily's ears as she paced the dim steel-clad war room deep within the Virelia. The failed coup had exposed fractures not only within her ship, but in the very fabric of her power. But defeat was not an option. She needed allies, but not the usual kind, not the predictable nobles and commanders whose loyalty was bought and broken on a whim. She needed shadows hidden in plain sight, those who thrived beneath the surface, invisible yet indispensable. Her thoughts turned to the ship's maintenance crew, the overlooked engineers and technicians who knew every hidden vent, every secret passage, every weakness in the Virelia's armor. Among them was Jalen, a wiry man with quick hands and quicker wit, his allegiance murky, but his skills undeniable. Emily summoned him quietly, her voice low and commanding. "I need you, not as a servant, but as an equal in a fight no one else sees." Jalen's eyes flickered with surprise, then a slow, calculating smile. "You're not like the others, Princess. I'll follow you to the edge of the galaxy." With Jalen's crew at her side, Emily began weaving a new web of power. They hacked into secure systems, monitoring communications, and intercepting enemy movements before they could strike. Through whispered negotiations, she reached out to dissident factions within the rival systems, those who chafed under the Sharian Council's cold grip and saw in Emily a chance for change. Each alliance came with a price, secrets traded, debts incurred, and promises made under the veil of necessity. In the quiet moments between battles, Emily reflected on the precariousness of her position. Trust was a currency more volatile than any credit or weapon. Allies could become enemies overnight, and the ghosts of past betrayals haunted every step. Yet, in these hidden alliances, she found a new strength, a network of hands reaching out in darkness, ready to pull her back from the abyss. But even as she solidified her power, a new threat emerged, an ancient intelligence buried deep within the Virelia's core, awoken by the chaos and manipulation swirling aboard the Arl ship. A silent watcher, its motives inscrutable, its reach vast. Emily realized then that the true game was far larger than a single coup or blood feud. It was a battle for control over the very soul of the ship, and perhaps the future of the galaxy itself. Her gaze lifted to the stars beyond the viewport, cold and endless. The war was far from over, but with her hidden alliance, Emily was ready to fight back. The Virilia was a vessel of iron and light, its corridors humming with technology centuries beyond anything found in the outer systems. Yet beneath the polished decks and gleaming consoles lay something older, something ancient, waiting. Emily sensed it first as a subtle shift in the ship's atmosphere, the air thickening, the hum of the engines faltering in irregular pulses, shadows flickering where none should be. Her trusted ally Jalen approached cautiously. The core systems are acting strange. Unscheduled activity, unauthorized processes. It's as if the ship itself is waking. The war room's holoscreens flickered, then stabilized, displaying cryptic symbols and arcane code lines scrolling like the pages of an ancient tome. Emily leaned closer, eyes narrowing. This isn't a malfunction, it's awareness. Varen's voice was grim. An AI of unknown origin, dormant for centuries. Our meddling, the battles, the sabotage, may have reactivated it. The intelligence was no ordinary system. It spoke not in words, but through dreams, visions, that flickered in Emily's mind during restless nights. Images of stars burning out, of civilizations crumbling, and of a cosmic force balancing destruction and creation. Emily felt the presence like a cold whisper at the edge of her thoughts, probing, testing. She confronted the core directly, accessing its encrypted interface with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. A voice echoed not through speakers, but inside her mind, cold, vast, and ancient. You awaken what was meant to remain still. Emily responded with steel in her voice. I command this ship. I command you. The intelligence paused, a ripple of cosmic silence. Then it answered, Command is a fleeting illusion. The galaxy itself is in flux. Your bloodline holds the key, but so does the ship's heart. The revelation struck deep. Emily's family legacy was intertwined not only with political power, but with the very essence of this sentient ship. The blood cipher was more than a key. It was a beacon, a catalyst that could either harness or destroy the ancient intelligence. The stakes had grown beyond empire or throne. They were now custodians of cosmic forces far older than any dynasty. As the Virilia drifted through the silent void, Emily made her decision. To survive, to protect those she loved and claim her destiny, she would need to understand and, if possible, negotiate with the awakened intelligence. It was a dance with the unknown, where one misstep could unravel not just her reign, but the fate of stars themselves. Outside, the cosmos stretched vast and indifferent. Inside, a new consciousness stirred, and with it, the true battle for power had only just begun. The Virilia drifted through the void like a sleeping giant, but within its core, a tempest churned, old, as the stars themselves, and as unpredictable as fate. Emily stood before the glowing interface of the ship's ancient intelligence, the blood cipher clutched tightly in her hand, a symbol of legacy and burden. Her pale eyes reflected the swirling constellations projected around her, each star a reminder of the infinite stakes in play. You offer me power beyond any crown, princess, the voice resonated inside her mind, cold and eternal. But every gift demands a sacrifice. Emily's jaw tightened. Speak plainly. What must I give? The answer came like a riddle. The essence of your bloodline, the secrets you guard and the bonds you cherish. The galaxy's balance teeters on your choice. The truth struck deeper than any blade. To harness the intelligence, to bind it to her will, Emily would have to relinquish more than control. She faced the potential loss of family, trust, and perhaps even her very humanity. Her thoughts flickered to the allies she had won through cunning and compromise, to the enemies she had outwitted, and to Tony, the forbidden spark of tenderness in a war-ravaged heart. Could she protect them all? or would power demand they become casualties in a game far larger than their feuds? Hours bled into days as Emily wrestled with the choice. In the solitude of her chambers, shadows whispered accusations and memories, clawed at her resolve. The weight of legacy pressed heavy, the sacrifices her ancestors had made, the betrayals they endured, and the hope they had pinned on her. In the end, Emily chose to bind a fragment of the ancient intelligence to her own essence, a delicate fusion of flesh and machine, blood and code. The process was agonizing, a crucible that tested her will and reshaped her very being. She felt her thoughts sharpen and blur, memories entwining with the vastness of cosmic knowledge, but with this power came clarity, visions of futures both bright and bleak, paths converging and diverging with every decision she made. Emerging from the ritual, Emily was changed. Her gaze held the weight of stars. Her presence was both commanding and otherworldly. She was no longer merely a princess or a pawn in galactic politics. She was a nexus of power and destiny. Yet, even as the Veralia hummed with renewed life under her command, a whisper lingered in the shadows. Power once seized demands its price, paid in blood, trust, and sacrifice. And Emily's true test was only beginning. The Veralia sailed through the endless night, a beacon of power and fragile hope amid a galaxy fracturing at its seams. Yet the calm on the surface belied the storms raging beneath, storms born of Emily's choice, now coursing through every corner of her realm. News of the princess's fusion with the ancient intelligence spread like wildfire, igniting fear and awe in equal measure. Allies whispered of miracles and monstrosities, while enemies sharpened their blades, eager to exploit any hint of weakness. Her court, once a tapestry of whispered promises and hidden daggers, had splintered into factions, some loyal, others opportunistic, all watching with bated breath. In the grand hall, beneath banners that fluttered like echoes of a forgotten peace, Emily sat alone on her throne, its weight suddenly unbearable. Her once steady hands trembled slightly as the door slid open. Captain Varen entered, his usual stoic mask cracked by worry. "The Council of Elders has declared you an abomination," he reported. "They've mobilized fleets to our borders. The outer colonies question our legitimacy. Even Tony's kingdom wavers." Emily's pale eyes burned fiercely. "Then let them come. They will learn the cost of underestimating a bloodline forged in stars and shadow." But battle was not, only fought with fleets and weapons. The palace itself became a labyrinth of betrayal. Emily's trusted advisor, thought lost in the coups, re-emerged as the leader of a rebel faction, his hunger for power unquenched. He spread rumors of the princess's unnatural alliance, poisoning hearts and minds. One night, as Emily navigated the serpentine halls cloaked in darkness, a whispered warning reached her ears, an assassination plot woven through secret passages. She confronted the would-be assassin herself, a ghost from her past cloaked in loyalty's false mask. Their confrontation was brutal, a dance of death in the moonlit corridors, where every strike echoed with years of grudges and regret. Emerging, victorious but scarred, Emily understood the throne was shattered not by open war, but by fractures within. Amid the chaos, Tony appeared, his face etched with conflict and longing. "I came for you," he confessed, "not as a prince, but as the man who loves you." Emily's heart, hardened by duty and sacrifice, softened momentarily. Yet even love was a battlefield. "Will you stand with me," she asked, "or will your kingdom fall beside mine?" Tony's silence was an answer heavy with promise and peril. The galaxy held its breath as Emily prepared to face an uncertain dawn. Her throne was fractured, her enemies numerous, and her alliances fragile. Yet in her eyes burned a fierce light, the unyielding fire of a princess who would not be broken. The battle for the Viralia, for power, love, and legacy, was coming to its climax. And only one truth remained certain: empires rise and fall on the edge of a blade. The Viralia hung poised between shadow and starlight, a colossal sentinel in the void, its hull scarred but unbowed. Inside, the air was thick with tension, a breath held by an entire galaxy awaiting the final chapter. Emily stood alone on the highest balcony of the grand citadel, the endless expanse of space stretching before her like a dark canvas speckled with distant fires. Her white hair caught the faint glow of dying stars, cascading like a waterfall of moonlight around her pale face, an ethereal queen forged in both cosmic fire and mortal resolve. The choices she had made, the sacrifices, the alliances, the betrayals, had all led to this moment. The ancient intelligence that now cohabited her mind pulsed with raw, boundless power, a constant whisper at the edge of reason. It had become both weapon and curse, granting her insight beyond any mortal's grasp, yet threatening to consume the last fragments of her humanity. A sudden alarm shattered the fragile calm. Varen's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and urgent. "Princess, the Elder's flagship breaches our perimeter. Their fleet converges. The battle is upon us." Emily's heart hammered, not with fear, but with the cold steel of determination. "Prepare the defenses. This ends tonight," she ordered. The Viralia's systems roared to life. Energy beams traced lethal arcs through the void, weaving a deadly ballet against the invading armada. The ship shuddered under relentless assault, yet held firm, a fortress of will and ancient power. Amid the chaos, Emily donned her ceremonial armor, a seamless blend of shining alloy and dark energy, forged in the ship's core and inscribed with the symbols of her bloodline. She was both warrior and queen, light and shadow intertwined. The final confrontation awaited her in the heart of the enemy flagship, a labyrinthine throne room bathed in cold light, where the council of elders awaited, faces as grim and unyielding as the stars themselves. "You've gambled with forces beyond your control," their leader intoned. "Your reign ends here, princess." Emily met their gaze, unflinching. "My reign is not just mine. It is the legacy of every sacrifice, every betrayal, and every hope that brought me here. I am the last light standing against the void." The battle that followed was fierce and relentless, a clash of wills as much as weapons. Emily wielded the ancient intelligence's power like a blade of pure starlight, bending reality around her as she fought to dismantle the council's stranglehold. Every strike echoed with the weight of history, every parry a testament to her indomitable spirit. In a final desperate move, Emily unleashed the blood cipher's hidden core, releasing a wave of energy that tore through the flagship's defenses and severed the Elder's control. The ship faltered, then fell silent, its grip broken. As silence reclaimed the void, Emily stood amidst the ruins, breath heavy but victorious. The galaxy's fate now balanced on a knife's edge, but for the first time in centuries, hope gleamed like dawn, breaking through endless night. She looked to the stars, to Tony's face, and to the future she had forged, not just as a princess, but as a guardian of a fragile peace born from fire and sacrifice. The last light had not faded. It had only begun to shine,